Good day to you from Anagalactic on the first day of August. We are studying physics because we're trying to learn what the universe is trying to tell us. We also have the advantage of being able to study consciousness, which is not precisely physics, but it gives us another vantage on what the universe is trying to tell us because it's telling it to someone. And we begin with consciousness in order to approach the topic from the recipient's point of view. So the consciousness is considered to be an entity. We have various capacities. We are a cellular organism. So we do have a physical presence. We're not just ethereal or disembodied beings. However, there is that funny aspect of consciousness, which is an incorporeal notion. Now, it can be approached from the point of view of physics, and indeed is. Generally speaking, neurology is basically a branch of biology because the consciousness is somehow exuded. That would be the Western point of view, or the consciousness inhabits. That would be more of an Eastern point of view, perhaps. What's the relationship? That has been called the mind-body problem. It has also been called the hard problem of consciousness. You may have heard the subject of consciousness come up in discussions of artificial intelligence. Intelligence is more to the idea of a mind. But when you're talking about consciousness, you have to be able to define it somehow, and indeed there are several ways of defining, or indeed approaching, a definition of consciousness. A definition will always have a reference frame, so that there can be more than one definition of something being studied in physics. In the case of consciousness, you may want to approach the subject of consciousness from the point of view of physics. Now we're just going to be taking a look at a few people who have been talking about this very interesting topic, which I've grown to become quite fascinated with, and I think it's inevitable if you do start studying this sort of stuff, or you just become interested to see what people are talking about when they talk about consciousness or the mind, spirit, soul. All of these come into play in various approaches to this topic. So to begin with, we have Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who has a degree in philosophy. He also has a degree in engineering. I believe he works at CERN, and when I say that, I believe he's still working at CERN, a Hadron Collider, as it is now called, what used to be called a cyclotron. He was born in Brazil, but he has Dutch citizenship, but he has, I believe it is Danish lineage. He's a most fascinating man who I've come to admire quite a bit. He talks about consciousness in a way no man has ever talked about it before. He's a leading theoretic. You would probably want to say philosopher here, but he does treat the topic scientifically. The bottom line is we always try to treat topics rationally, that is, with rational logic. He certainly does so, and he's qualified to do so. He's written numerous books. He has an excellent website. It's excellently organized, and he disseminates his knowledge freely. He's been working at this topic for well over a decade, and he's extraordinarily respected, I believe deservedly so. I have adopted his framework because I find that his framework has direct application in my line of work, which is basically geometry. So there's an interesting connection. He has a new framework for physics. And this is equivalent to reapproaching science from a slightly, or perhaps even dramatically different frame of reference than physical matter. He does not really subscribe. And actually, this is the basis of his work, that he does not believe in materialism. He does not believe in particle reality. He does not actually believe in matter. And this is not to attempt to put him in the, way out there department. He's quite practical in his approach, but it is revolutionary. Nobody has ever come up with the framework that Dr. Bernardo Kastrup has come up with, which he calls analytic idealism. It's inevitable that one finds some philosophical terms in attempting to define, to have words to speak of this subject. What he says, essentially, is quite simple, that there is such a thing as a materialistic framework, which is essentially taken for granted, I would say, by physicists. That those who study physics and attempt to explain things according to the laws of physics, what we know about physical reality, this takes a particulate point of view, an atomistic point of view, which simply means that the universe is constructed of smaller and smaller building blocks. But now that we've reached the quantum threshold, where things are no longer particles, that's fair to say, although that's quite a topic. Quantum mechanics gets quite spooky, as we're going to find out as we get to a few more gentlemen who have been talking about this in the 20th century, going into the 21st century. It's not really a denial of material reality. That would be kind of crazy. He's not crazy. What he says is, it's a mistake to assume the framework that Western science does. Western science goes back a long ways to Greek times, but it is a Western form of approach to physics, to the universe, to what is. It's materialistic. That seems so obvious, it really seems obvious to me. That's quite tricky if perhaps it may be a considerable idea that perhaps the universe is not best seen as physical. Not that it's not physical, it's that it's superpositional, adapted from quantum mechanics, where the term was first used. It's a form of logic. It's a new form of logic. You could say that it's always been known of, because in strict binary logic, what is usually or sometimes called linear logic, slightly different from binary logic, but they have something in common. They're sequential, and they rely on true-false dichotomy. That a statement in physics, in science, in rational logic, a statement is either true or not. Well, that's actually an untrue statement. There are many more statements that can be made, plausible statements, that are neither true nor false, strictly. It's some combination. And when that is applied in physics, you get Schrödinger's cat problem, which is strict superposition. The cat is alive, and the cat is dead. And the cat is alive at exactly the same moment, at precisely the same moment. One moment. That is called quantum state superposition. And Schrödinger applied it to the case of the cat in order to underscore the absurdity of saying that something is true and false at the same time in superposition, which is the quantum state problem. And that is the problem that comes out in entanglement. And it comes out in other situations, such as the collapse of the wave function. And there are various paradoxes having to do with time. Perhaps you've heard of the twins problem. We won't be going into that today, although I have in the past. But this is a most interesting form of logic, which is being applied in computer technology as quantum computing. And it relies on this superposition, which in this case would be the superposition of mathematical state. And that's combinative in a way that was never suspected might be utilized, and that's being explored, as I'm certain you're aware. That quantum computing, although it has not achieved a real threshold of applicability such that it can be taken perfectly seriously, it is taken seriously enough to pursue it, and money goes into it. I was sorely tempted to pursue quantum computing, and I actually did so for about a year, within the past 6 years, I studied quantum computing under Scott Aronson. Not in his class, but reading his stuff and watching his videos and coming to understand more about this system of computation, which is not binary. It relies on quantum superposition, quantum state superposition. And the reason I became interested in it is not strictly or only due to the fact that I made my livelihood as a computer programmer, but because there's something called the Bloch sphere. And if you've never studied the Bloch sphere, B-L-O-C-H, so I do pronounce that C-H as in Loch Lomond, so it's the Bloch sphere. I took 4 years of German, so I can roll that guttural thing in the back of my throat. It does sound strange, but that is how his name is actually pronounced, at least in Europe. Bloch. So the Bloch sphere uses Ket notation to denote geometric and mathematic positions on a spherical surface. That is so bizarre, but it actually works. But it uses different forms of gate logic than are used in standard computers. Standard computers use microcircuitry with gate logic, using semiconductor technology to regulate the flow of a small bit of voltage through a gate so that it's either on or off. It's either on or off, but as you may know, part of quantum mechanics goes into that practical application of binary logic and electronics in something called quantum tunneling, which is essential in the microcircuitry, that there is a quantum phenomenon involved even there. But essentially, that's simply so that you can get the gate to stay on or off, so that you have a binary system set up with gate logic, is set up with circuitry, which eventually forms an operating system and a computer, which is much more than just its operating system. And that, of course, is very famous now. Your cell phone is essentially a very small handheld supercomputer with capabilities which 50 years ago were science fiction. So we've come a long way in technology and microcircuitry. Also at the other end of the spectrum, we're going into outer space. We've visited several planets with probes. Men have stood on the moon, and it is projected that there is a good possibility sometime in the future of a manned mission to Mars. So a lot is going on in science that is just a century ago was the subject of Jules Verne. It's just science fiction, just crazy Binneth, Crady Binneth. Oh, it's not Crady anymore, man. It's happening. And that really is, it really creates quite a mindset for folks like you and me who are just trying to understand. We're trying to catch up. That's what every newborn human does, is you try to catch up. Go through the grades, go through school, learn, be educated, and catch up. And then you might be so interested that you get involved, and if you're Bernardo Kastrup, you get so involved that you come up with a new framework for physics. I still get kind of a chill down my spine when I say this, partially because I am closely allied in my approach to science with Bernardo, but I never dared to suggest that you might want to approach physics with a completely different framework than atomicity, materialism, and really linear logic. Instead, it looks like, according to Bernardo, it looks like the universe is made of consciousness. Consciousness is not something I was raised to think is science. Consciousness can be studied scientifically, as I began this video by saying. And we are going to be checking that to see what physiology, what neurologists, what those who look at the brain functions say about consciousness. And Bernardo is very, very interested in that aspect of his framework, which is what? That you do not see the universe at all. You cannot possibly see the universe except in your mind, because the universe does not enter into your mind. Your perceptual system interprets signals, which are reconstructed in what you could call the mind, but which Bernardo prefers to call consciousness. And there's a subtle distinction there, which I don't think it's necessary for us to fully explore at this time. But when you stop and think of what is the mind, that's more of intelligence, computation, kind of like the computer of the mind, the computer of your brain, and that's more materialistic. But when you say consciousness, you're talking about a deeper level of perception of being. Being. And this is the subject of ontology. Now, I would like to just mention that Bernardo has a degree in philosophy. He has a PhD in philosophy, but when you do that, I checked the universities, for instance, that he attended, where he got his PhD in philosophy. You choose a caption. And for instance, Tim Maudlin, whom we're coming to, also has a PhD in the philosophy of science, which is a specific branch of philosophy. Quite important, the philosophy of science. Oh yes, I'm sure that you understand that could be just a bit difficult to define. Oh, it is, but it's so fascinating because you can learn a lot and gain very powerful insights in this way, as Tim Maudlin and Bernardo Kastrup have found out. Now, Tim Maudlin is a materialist, and the reason I mention him, and I will bring him to front stage in a moment, is because he's probably the foremost pundit, meaning that in a neutral sense, he's one of the foremost authorities. Now, authority is something that is agreed on. You may say that you're an authority. I don't think that he attempts to do that, but since he is a teacher, he does have a certain amount of authority. He has to, or he can't teach, because you're teaching something. Well, he takes a very, very powerful position on materialism, and he hates, and I hate to use that word, but this came out on the Kurt Jai-Mungal interview, where Kurt Jai-Mungal brought together Bernardo Kastrup and Tim Maudlin for a debate, which was over in under 5 minutes because they wanted to tear each other to shreds, and it ruined what was supposed to be a 90-minute to 120-minute debate between these two powerful minds so that we all could benefit. Perhaps they would have even benefited from each other. This has been admitted by many. You know, it's not your enemy. But if you are an authority, you may consider that someone's counter-authority is threatening. And that should never happen in science, but it does happen when monetary and pride considerations enter in. It never should, but it does. We're humans. And so they acted like two little schoolgirls, and I really hated both of those men afterward because they behaved so despicably that they simply cannot be, not either one of them, they cannot be forgiven for what they did. And they were both as guilty as sin, as the expression goes. And I urge you to watch that. Kurt Jai-Mungal, much to his credit, did not pull that video. He decided to publish it, and he left it on. But he has certainly apologized for his role in that debacle which is a permanent blot and shame on science forever. Because these two men are extraordinarily powerful, cogent, otherwise reasonable men. But Bernardo Kastrup says that materialism is out. And Tim Maudlin says, no, Bernardo, your idea of consciousness, whatever you mean by that, to quote him, is out. And they just, boom! If it had been the UFC, they would have been kicking each other in the you-know-whats. So when I say they hate each other, they do. Bernardo also apologized. Tim Maudlin never apologized. And that means he's a pundit, which is why I call him that, but not in a neutral sense. He's a pundit in the worst sense. Now, Kastrup can be forgiven. Maudlin cannot be. He lost. But even though Kastrup disgraced himself, and he knows that he did, but he can't back down. This is just something that sometimes happens. He considered that he was baited because it was Tim Maudlin that said silly, but actually it was Bernardo Kastrup he was invited to begin the so-called debate, which is supposed to be a positive thing, not as enemies, but as colleagues, to share. And that's the whole idea, is to share. That's what science does. Not in their case, they didn't want to share a goddamn thing with each other. But Bernardo he didn't draw first blood, but he really scratched at his opponent's face quite consciously. He baited Maudlin, and Maudlin was just in no mood to be taunted. And so he reacted violently. So it was Maudlin's fault that it spun out of control. And then both men had a chance to recover themselves. They refused. They would rather go down in flames. Just like two antagonists in some war. That now they will not negotiate at all. Well, that's not science, baby. But Bernardo is forgivable. And I do forgive him, and that's my right. I really do have to make an evaluation. And it's subjective. I'm not saying I'm some kind of, judge or decider, but as an individual, of course you are. You have to. So there's no disgrace in me saying that I don't like Maudlin. I don't care for him anymore. Although I still respect him. I haven't burned the 2 books that I bought of his. No, he's still who he was. It's just that I'll never be able to view that because he does not recant. He will not even entertain the notion that Bernardo Kastrup might have anything to offer at all. Well, I'm sorry, Tim, you are out. But Bernardo is in. Bernardo won in the strangest debate of all time because he was able to back out swiftly. He said, I'm not putting up with this Tim Maudlin. He does not respect me. He started scratching. Although that's not true, Bernardo started scratching. But then Tim came back and just gouged him right in the eyes. And Bernardo said, I'm not putting up with this. I love you. He's talking to Kurt Mongol, the best interviewer on the YouTube circuit, and has been for about 2 or 3 years. He earned his stripes, in both senses, and boy was that embarrassing to Kurt. I thought he was going to cry. And I actually had some communication with Kurt Mongol, just a little bit, because he's so busy. I try not to bother these men. But I do covet an interview in the Kurt Mongol show. I think he should interview me. Well, that's because I'm human, just like Tim Maudlin and Bernardo Kastrup. But what does Bernardo Kastrup say? That your consciousness, as you conceive it, you can definitely say it's the basis of reality, because everything you see is an instrument panel, and you don't see reality at all. You can't. Your perceptual system is not designed to see reality. Essentially, what he's saying is, in order to see reality, you would have to be some other kind of being. And you're not some other kind of being. You're a limited, finite, cellular organism equipped with a perceptual system, which is an array of perceptions, but they're all governed by your cellular organism. And he says, well, that means that you are not seeing reality. Unless you redefine reality as that which is the readings on your instrument panel. So you're not a god, you're not an angel, you're not a disembodied spirit, you're not of the order of the reality of the universe. And the way he decides this matter has got to be one of the most amazing insights that I have ever heard a man reach. And at first I didn't like it. And I called him an Eastern mystic about 3 years ago when I first learned of his work. I basically took Tim Maudlin's view. That's not science. It's mysticism. I do not any longer think that. It's to my credit, I should have to say in retrospect, that I went to Bernardo Kastrup's site in order to find out what he says himself. Well, then I was flabbergasted to find out what he said about his work, what he thinks he's discovered. Well, I think that he's right, that he did discover something. He discovered a completely different framework for physics. Does it obviate, that is, does it somehow degrade or destroy the physical point of view? No, and he doesn't say that. Although he really is walking a tight wire. Because when you say that physics cannot possibly be materialistic, you are going to get some supercilious reaction from a general crowd of physicists, mathematicians, and even from myself, a poor, humble geometer. How could I or anybody else justify Bernardo's point of view? Well, the very first thing that you have to do, as it's a good thing I did this, is be sure you know what that man is saying. You don't believe what someone else says about him. And really, you have to dig in order to force out what the man himself is trying to say. But you see, when you have a discovery of such a nature, I'll just say such a level or an order, I mean, you're going all the way to the top when you say that you have a new framework for physics. He says that he's replacing the framework of physics with a better framework. And the justification is, in his own words, parsimony, which means Occam's razor, which is a form of simplification. I was listening to that. Go on, Bernardo. What do you say about your parsimony? Your simplistic, your reductionism that makes things simple. That everything that you know about physics occurs in your consciousness. And that's the only place it occurs. Now, he understands that we are all looking at an objective reality. But he says there's no possibility that your view of objective reality is the same or even comparable with another man's. Yes, we have laws of physics. We have mathematical proofs for several powerful statements. Really, a very huge number of powerful statements. And he understands that this leads to all kinds of good results based on the use of rational logic. He's not denying anything that's already known. He's simply saying that we've missed something of it's not even fundamental importance. It goes beyond being fundamental. It's supererogatory. In other words, this takes precedence over everything we've ever admitted in standard physics, which is that you are not seeing well enough until you admit, as he attempts to prove, that the universe is consciousness. He does not say that the universe is conscious. That's called panpsychism. And there's some other fancy-dancy words. When you say the universe is conscious, you're thereby saying that the universe is an entity. That, in this case, a living entity, some form of sentience. And that's not what he says. He says that the universe is consciousness itself, which is not saying that it's conscious. It's saying that it possesses the characteristic of consciousness. It has that property, and that's its main property. That it's not atoms. It's not even energy. It's consciousness. And that introduces such an interesting possibility. Because what does that mean? Now, he fully admits that the thrust of his work in order to present this to the scientific community, including myself and you and anybody else who cares to listen to him, including men like Tim Maudlin, who will simply try to kick him in the ass. He understands. He understands that is going to happen. But he's not going to let the man, do whatever he wants on the Kurtjai Mongol show to him. So he rebuked Tim and said, I love you, Kurt, but fuck this guy, I'm gone. And that's it. And Tim, brilliant Tim, the pundit, the real scientist, he said, ciao, baby, ciao. Fuck you, Tim Maudlin. Fuck you, Tim Maudlin. Fuck you. You're a disgrace, and you're not ever going to get out of it. But Bernardo comes through with flying colors. Every man makes mistakes, and at the level that these men operate at, if you're not making mistakes, baby, you're not trying hard enough. I'm very lenient on errors, but there's an aftermath, there's a follow-up, there's a repercussion, and you had better knuckle under and admit what you did. Bernardo did so well enough. But you see, he really is committed to this, and it took me a while to understand his level of commitment. It's impossible to understand such a level of commitment to what sounds like a mystical idea until you realize he's not dealing with mysticism at all. Although, we'll get to that, but that's not what he's trying to do. He is not presenting this as some kind of religion, although, you see what's happening. He's saying that the universe has the property of consciousness. How does he get away with that? The way he gets away with it is the most obvious fact of all. That everything we know as a human is consciousness. That's all we are. As scientists, we're conscious beings. So everything is consciousness from a human point of view. Well, Bernardo said there's got to be a reason for that. It's because we're derived. The consciousness in a human is a derived characteristic of the universe. So whatever we're doing with our consciousness, the universe is doing it already. And we're simply a manifestation of consciousness. And that cannot be disproved. It is interesting to at least ask the question, can that be proved? This is the cutting edge of science. This is what I'm always looking for, is the cutting edge. This is it. In physics. And Bernardo is in the lead right now. Because his system is susceptible to interpretations that are extraordinarily helpful. And I discovered that. I checked very carefully this year, and all the way into last year, 2025, but I really stepped up my game because I have adopted his system. I accept it. He's right. The universe is consciousness, and that has, as if all I ever needed was to have some more floodgates opened, when all the floodgates are opening to me with this geometry, Bernardo really added to my arsenal of logic, a framework for the dozens of discoveries I've made in physics due to a new geometry, which is saying a lot, and I may end up starting to talk like a pundit. I have to. And that's why I'm so sensitive to these men's foibles as humans, because I'm susceptible to the same thing. In order to be heard in science, you have to raise your voice. And if you're opposed, you may get upset. And I have shown every sign, even though I don't actually have any critics or enemies, nobody listens to me at all. I'm all set for a fight. All set for a fight. But you see, I believe that a scientist is not supposed to be a fighter. And the reason I believe that is the same reason all rational men distrust emotionality. It's because it interferes with logic. It's called bias. It's called prejudice. And if you're megalomanic, it just is simply, all that means is you're biased in favor of yourself. Well, that's not science. But it is part of the game. It's part of being human to be heard. Because it's not an automatic process that when you make a discovery, no matter what you think of your discovery, and I have learned to think very highly of my discovery in geometry, you're not going to convince anybody else by raising your voice. But to get their attention, you might want to do that. That's dangerous. And I don't like doing it. But I do it. And I know I'm going to continue to do it, but man, I'm trying to suppress it. I really am, because that's not the right way to do science. It's not to raise your voice, to make accusations, to be defensive, like you're defending something that belongs to you. I don't make money, so I'm immune from that aspect, but Bernardo isn't, and neither is Tim, and neither is anyone else who presents science. I'm really the odd man out. There's very few scientists of whatever description who are not after money, because, I mean, come on. Even I recognize, I wish I were making money, but I know, and I've known for decades, that I simply cannot mix money into science. Because I see what it does to men, I see what it does to the system of science itself. It ruins it. Money ruins everything. I know we need it, and I'm not saying I'm against money. As I say, I would love to make money at what I'm doing. Well, I've also come to realize that perhaps what I need to admit to myself, in order to avoid the pitfalls that these men are subject to, I don't want to do the same thing. I want to avoid all the pitfalls. I need to be able to disassociate, to uncouple the concept of recognition from simple present what you know, without raising your voice, without resorting to what will eventually classify you in everyone's eyes as you're prejudiced, you're biased, you're perhaps megalomanic. Well, that's not good. And I don't believe that I am at heart megalomanic, and so it alarms me that I show increasing signs. And I've made claims, well, I'm running out of time, I'm getting old, you know, how come nobody is going to interview me? Hey, here's the bottom line, so you know where we're all at. All of us, Bernardo, Tim, the other guys we're going to talk about. You're doing science for whatever reason, but you are going to have some discipline. And we all have to do this. And the objective at all times is suppress emotion. Always. That's always. And the problem is that you can't always suppress your emotion. And you shouldn't. There are certain times when emotion is appropriate. But really, it has to be congenial. It has to be positive. You're trying to make your case. You're showing your excitement so that it can be shared. You know, that you're believable. That you're not just coming from left field. That you believe in yourself. That tends to say to others, well, all right, prove it. So that's what a scientist always says. Now I'm listening. You've got my attention. Now you turn off the emotion. Now you stop with all the emotion because you got some attention. You're being listened to. This is consensual science, the way science spreads, the way science actually begins. It begins with an individual such as Albert Einstein, but Albert Einstein had to find some way to be heard. Well, you might not be. You might not be heard. Well, then you have to do something about that. And I do have to do something about that. So I am writing a paper. This is a series that just began within the past 3 videos where I'm documenting the entire process of writing my paper, which should be done by Christmas. And it will be a formal paper, but it's not going to be submitted to any publication house. That's not open to me at this time. Well, that could make me a little upset, angry, you know, all that. Oh, no, not anymore. No, if I have that problem, I have to solve it. And emotionality is not going to do it. Work is figure out how come you're not getting the attention you think this subject deserves. Well, it's your problem, not anyone else's, and I have to deal with that. I still am. I work alone, so that's actually a hazard for several reasons. But I do work alone, and I have for 16 years. It's proved beneficial to me now that I made this rather amazing discovery in geometry, which is simply the geometry of the sphere. But it has such far-reaching applications that it just continues to amaze me. But then I discovered some of these men who are kind of on the same track that I am, and so I'm greatly attracted to Bernardo Kastrup, and I have adopted his system called analytic idealism, which all that means is the universe as an ideal is not atoms. It's not physical. The universe as an ideal, which is a Platonic concept, the concept of ultimate form, that form exists kind of by itself. It's kind of a spooky sort of a thing, but you can make a case for it. Plato certainly did. And so that's called idealism, that the universe has an ideal form, or it's made of ideal forms. Ideal meaning they're not physical, they're structural. Well, Bernardo discovered by a direct insight that the form of the universe is consciousness. It's not atomistic, it's conscious. Well, very interesting to say that it's conscious. It doesn't, that's not what he says. He says that the universe has the fundamental and profound characteristic, its primary characteristic, is that it's consciousness. And the reason humans have consciousness is because the universe has consciousness and we share it. But the way we share it, according to Bernardo, is as you conceive of the universe as being a river. That it's a river, it's moving. Very important. He considers this to be a dynamic concept. Physicality is not dynamic, it's static. He's adding motion. And so in this metaphor, this analogy, which I think is quite simple and easy to understand, a very difficult concept broken down into where it's now you can understand it. What is it? The universe is a river of consciousness that's moving. And that's why it's consciousness, is because it is moving all the time. That's been proved in physics, by the way, so he's on firm ground, if you can put it that way. But the river is moving, so what about my consciousness, your consciousness, Bernardo's consciousness, the consciousness of any individual? What is that? It's an eddy. It's a locked system. It partakes of the motion, and it partakes of the substance, whatever that might be. That's an abstract substance. But something's moving. And that's what makes consciousness, is that motion. And it's simply the same motion that the universe has, except it's locked into a spiral. It's locked into an infundibulum. It's locked into a maelstrom. It's locked into a funnel. It's locked into a circle. That's correct. It's locked into a cycle. It's a closed cycle. And that is the metabolic side. That's the physiological side, the neuronal side. That's the physical aspect of this motion, is that your body produces that motion. He does not say that. He doesn't say that your body is producing that motion. That's the old, I would say, Western idea, the Greek idea. The physicality that he says is not correct. Your consciousness is produced by your brain. And you may extend that to further than the brain, because the brain is part of your trillion-celled organism, but the consciousness is not that organism. And it's not produced by the organism. Instead, what your mind is doing, what your brain is doing, with the mechanisms that manifest that your consciousness, it's accepting. It's simply regulating what's already there. And that's all it's doing, is it's regulating the flow of consciousness, which is now yours. It's part of the universe, but it's cut off because it's in a closed cycle, which is your consciousness. That's why you're an individual. You're not really part of the universe, although you are. So it is superpositional, and I believe that I am the first man to have achieved that recognition that what is called superposition, both in quantum computing and in quantum mechanics, that superposition, which was discovered in quantum mechanics and then is used as a logic system in quantum computing, I glommed onto that. It has to do with a surface geometry, which is an intrinsic geometry. It's not extrinsic. And that's the difference. What Bernardo has discovered is the intrinsicality of the universe from the point of view of a human consciousness, is that you have an intrinsic relationship with the universe. It's not generated by your brain. You are actually part of the universe because you're conscious. You have a closed loop in that system. It's connected, but it's not. It's connected and it's part of the universe. You're in the universe, so it's part of the universe. Is it connected? It's entirely connected. So how come it's entirely separate? It's both. The cat is alive and dead at the same time. And that's a major insight. Because what that implies is you can't possibly understand physics until you understand how you're perceiving it. It's with your consciousness. That's why you can understand the universe, is because you're seeing something that you recognize, because you're part of it. And you can see it, you can understand it. That's why. It's because it's consciousness. And that's what your consciousness is for. It's so that you can understand the universe. That's amazing. That's an amazing insight. And I can prove it physically now. And I'm the first man who's able to do that. I can prove mathematically and geometrically and with example after example from physics, both in the quantum mechanical world at that scale and at macro scale, that Bernardo's absolutely right. You cannot understand physics unless you understand what Bernardo is saying, which is revolutionary, much more important than Albert Einstein's discoveries by far. This goes to what we actually want to know. The reason we care about Albert Einstein is at a completely different level. Science is huge, and it does have this technology. Well, Albert Einstein was really good for technology. Let's face it. There'd be no space travel without Albert Einstein, because you can't navigate in solar systemic space with your probes, manned or unmanned, unless you account for time lag. And you can't, unless you know Albert's equations for relativistic conversion, without which your GPS system would not work. For anybody, military or otherwise, military. Yeah, that's where Albert fits in, military. And I'm not going to go further there because that invokes emotional reactions in myself, and I would assume then my viewers. And I'm not going to do that anymore. But that is the truth. Albert served technology, and that's all he served. Now, Bernardo serves what I would call heaven. Now, I checked to see where he stands spiritually, because you do have to check, certainly in this case. He's fine. He's non-committal. I would say he's agnostic. But he's agnostic from the point of view of an objective scientist, and a scientist has to remain objective. You cannot involve your subjectivity. Even if it's your consciousness, well, that's where now some areas open up that were closed before. And this could be the opening of Pandora's box. Count on it. Count on it. This is going to be so controversial that there has got to be some truth to it just for that reason. Because you don't get a controversy starting or restarting unless somebody hit a nerve. Well, somebody better hit a nerve pretty soon, because pretty soon the lights are going to go out on this planet, and I don't believe that can be stopped. So did science ever achieve its purpose? Can it achieve its purpose? Can it be conceived to even have a purpose? I say yes to all, and I've got that answer. And that's the most important aspect of science ever. That's what science is for, is to figure this out. Just you. Figure it out so that you're happy, so that you know. Because you know. And you have to be brutally honest, because anybody can invent a fantasy world. And whether paradise, and the great beyond is true or not, you have to address that question. But in science, I'm afraid you'll have to find some way to address that through physics, or you can't address it at all. It just has to do with how you feel. Well, we do have feelings. And they're much more important than our thoughts. Our feelings regulate us. But our thoughts are what we're enabled to have. That is rational logic. We have a rational logical subsystem that can be proved to have a purpose. And I discovered what that is. Although it's not anything new, it's just a new aspect. Just as Bernardo discovered a new aspect in framework science, the highest level of science of all. It's what's it all about, Alfie? Why are we doing this at all? Well, Bernardo gives the right framework for answering that kind of a question. Why are we doing science at all? Is it just to make rocket ships? Is it just to make cell phones? Is it just for technology? Does that have anything to do with the destiny of humankind or any individual? Well, you would have to say that it's affected your life, yeah. But has it affected you as a consciousness? No. Technology does not help you solve the questions you need to answer before you do anything else. And that's simply the game of life. You have to figure out the real question, and you have to get the right answer, or you lose. You're going to die anyway, but what a rational man goes for is the gold. And he must finally risk his life. Because you're already risking your life. So you have to ask yourself, what am I alive for? Why am I alive? Now, you don't want to go to the Boy Scouts. You don't want to go to Walt Disney. You don't want to go to the LDS Church or any church. You don't. But you do need to answer that question, and you will need guidance, because there are guides who will help you with that. They're called gurus or wise men. Some of them maybe are what you would call priests or holy men. And you can take it or leave it. You'll have a tough time wading through that morass, because there's Karl Marx. He was a guru. Oh, yeah, it goes all the way, Daddy-O. Joseph Smith, the self-acclaimed prophet. You have a prophetess in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You have the Pope in the Catholic Church. These are guides. They're supposed to guide you into the most difficult to answer questions of all. Life and death, life after death, the judgment, concepts of morality, what happens to Hitler, what happens to the murderers, is there justice in the universe, or are we stuck with a cuckoo clock universe and Hitler got away with murder, and so will Netanyahu and his successors, until we're all dead? So does this have any meaning at all? You have to answer that. I don't care if you're working barefoot on a farm, you've never heard of the Buddha, you've never heard of Jesus Christ, you've never heard of Muhammad, you're just trying to make a living, you're just planting vegetables, gathering fruit, maybe shooting an animal or two, you're trying to live, you don't know a fucking thing about any religious fucking leader. But you're still a man. You have exactly the same question that I do. Exactly the same question that you do. Have you forgotten your real question? Most men do. They forget. Because too much, and they finally say, fuck it. I don't have to answer that question. I don't care about morality. I have to make a living. Yeah, well, then you're never going to win the game. And when you die, you're going to be sorry and sad. Or not. I say you will be. Muhammad says you will be. Jesus says you will be. The Pope says you will be. But Karl Marx says no. The only thing that matters is the capitalist machine. Is that right? Not for me. Not for you either. You need to answer that question. What happens to you after you die? Why do you die? Why were you born? Why are you here? Well, then you ask, where does it come from? And you're not going to get an answer. The universe will hide that from you. I know because I dug as deep as I could, but I can't share that with you because you'd reject it out of hand. Even if I can prove it, you wouldn't accept it. I know the answers to all these questions already. But I can't explain it to you because you have no way to listen to me. There's no reason for you to listen to me. No reason. Except to have choices. So that's all I do. I provide you choices. Well, Bernardo Kastrup has provided us with a fantastic choice. A fantastic choice. Do you want to be blind? Or would you like to have the opportunity to see what consciousness actually is? Physically. There's our friend Tim Maudlin, who says that Bernardo is just full of shit. And in this little blurb here, Tim Maudlin is speaking on what reality is made of. And he certainly is not going to accept that reality is made of consciousness, because he's a pundit, and he's irredeemable. I still have hopes for the man. I'm not God. I don't judge his soul, but if he doesn't come clean, he's out. I speak for what I know, and that's what he's done to himself. He shot himself not in the foot. He shot himself in the heart. But he's still the foremost expert on the physical aspects of quantum mechanics, which is quite a difficult subject to navigate. In this particular video, it's actually a video, he's talking with such greats as Dr. Sabina Hassenfelder and some others, and I've already told you that he was brought face to face with Bernardo Kastrup, and he broke down and just started playing with himself, and then he screamed like a baby, acted like a little schoolgirl, and completely disgraced himself in a way that I can't even believe anybody would look at that man again without a violent reaction to just seeing his stupid face. But he's still alive. Maybe someday he'll hear this video, or he'll get a chance to talk with me. I'll set him straight. I'll set him straight without hurting him. And he will listen. Because I don't take no for an answer. You're gonna face up to this, Tim. What did you do? What did you do to that good scientist who's way ahead of you, and you're just locked? What are you doing? You know what he's actually doing? I checked, because I have 2 of his books, and I used to admire this man. I still potentially, because his accomplishments are real. He's probably the best exponent and explainer of John Bell's major discovery in quantum mechanics, which really changed the whole game. He's very good at explaining that. Oh, he's very good. He's a very good teacher. It's just that he has no use for mysticism. No, you're not going to change the way Tim sees. Well, that's too bad for Tim or anybody stupid enough to listen to him, because he's never going to achieve the actual goal. He's always going to be nothing but a theorist playing with himself, just like everybody else. Can't get the real answers, but he'll make a shitload of money. He's begging for money so he can build his castle, which he actually has. And I don't know how he got this and why he's begging for money. But he has his Institute for Fundamental Physics on an island in the Adriatic Sea between Italy and Croatia. And man, does make my mouth water. When I was in admiration of this man, I was hoping someday to go to that island and talk with him, because I believe that I'm his brother. I still do. It's just my brother has gotten into a hissy fit and totally disgraced himself so foully that he's irrecoverable unless he repents. And he won't. Well, if I talk with him, he will. I won't let him out of the room until he does repent. And we could come to blows. We might end up just punching each other out. Well, he would probably win that fight because he's about 20 years younger than I am. Or maybe, I don't know, he's about 10 years younger than me. I'm not sure. But he's younger, and I don't fight, so I would lose, and I shouldn't fight at all. Or even talk about fighting. I've never fought. Although we've all had one or two scraps. You can't get out of it. Well, I've won all my fights, but I'm not proud of it. Anyway, Tim Maudlin, there's our man who will speak for the pundit side of things. And just Bernardo Kastrup, nope. Well, that's what all stupid scientists, unworthy of their name, do in response to someone who challenges their money pipeline. I don't know why Tim thinks that's going to threaten his money pipeline. Bernardo is not asking Tim Maudlin to pay him, and he's not threatening to turn off the hose of Tim Maudlin's money. You know, they're not economically in competition. It's pride, and that's all it is pride. And I'm sorry to say that Kastrup was guilty of the same thing, but that's an hour. That's enough for now. We have some more faces coming up. I just want to flash to you what we're going to be looking at for your dancing and dining pleasure as we get into the theory of consciousness. I mean, we're done with this, and this for now. Oh, there's Bernardo. We've already seen him. There's Carl Jung. He's next on our list. That is Al-Ghazali, a man who lived about 1,000 years ago. We'll be talking about him. And these two men that you can't see, let me just adjust that. That is Jiddu Krishnamurti and David Bohm. Just expand that a little. See both those men's lovely faces. They collaborated for over 10 years. A most amazing journey. They both have a lot to say about consciousness, which is remarkably good for me because I'm doing the same thing that David Bohm did. And he's the only man to ever deduce anything rational from quantum mechanics, which is why he not only talked with Krishnamurti, but he also talked with the Dalai Lama, who praised, the Dalai Lama praised David Bohm to the skies. He said that David Bohm is his personal guru, the Dalai Lama's personal science guru. And he meant it, and he wrote a dedication to a book written shortly after Bohm died, somewhat prematurely. I think we all agree. What a loss. What a loss. And after we're done there, we're going to go, that's a definition of, well, those are the universities that offer a degree in philosophy with a major, or I guess you would say a caption, of science, the philosophy of science. And there's another, and this is the definition of ontology, which I'm always looking up to be absolutely sure. Ontology is the study of being and existence. Isn't that something? And that's as opposed to what? As opposed to epistemology. Let's take a quick look at that, just so we know the difference between that and ontology, which is the study of being. And what's epistemology? Why is it such a big difference? Oh, because that studies knowledge. It explores what knowledge is, how we get it, and what we are allowed to know. Boy, you better know that word. And there we have pictures of Tim Maudlin. There he is. So we'll be taking a look at Carl Jung, Krishnamurti, David Bohm, and Al-Ghazali, and a couple of other men who are vastly interested in the same topic that Bernardo Kastrup is interested in. I have a new version of Bernardo's system called synthetic idealism, which solves the problems that Bernardo can't solve. He can't find any application. He can't find any usefulness for his framework. I can. I saw it. It took a while. I can't say I saw it instantly, but once I did see it, I swear it's just like one of those. It's not very common and some men never experience, but it's the greatest feeling, it's the greatest experience that a scientist can have, is to realize that not only are you right, but you can see further than anyone else has ever been able to see in a way that can be shared using rational logic so other people can become convinced and share the joy that you have because you understand the universe, which is the whole idea. And you have to do it before you die or you lose, whatever that means. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more. It's still 100 degrees here. You may be able to tell that I'm pouring sweat, but I'm happier than a clam at high tide, which is how that whole metaphorical aphorism goes from the East Coast. So thank you for tuning in. It means so much to me, and I tried to express to you why it means so much to me. If this doesn't gain some kind of consensual approval from maybe just one other person, I need to be interviewed. But I'm not bitter anymore. Although it's still there, it still rankles. I want to be interviewed. Well, I haven't written my paper yet, so whom do I have to blame except myself? And I could tell more stories about it's all my own fault, so it's ridiculous for me to feel anything. Except hope and joy. And faith, hey, I'm not stopping. I'm going on. So thank you for tuning in. It means a lot. You're part of this now. I hope you're getting something out of this. I hope I've shared some of the excitement that I feel. I'm not faking this. This is real. I swear to God this is real. But you see, I just raised my voice and invoked the deity. Scientists don't do that. Well, I do. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.